Hello and welcome to today's video. In today's video, I'm going to sculpt a tree decoration, not a decoration for a tree, for my wife for our anniversary. So we just had our wedding anniversary recently, and I wanted to make her something special. Originally, we had a plan for a little bit of a trip, but because of the certain health crisis going on right now, that got put on hold. Understandably so. But I still wanted to do something special for her. And so I had an idea to do a 3D wall art, or it could sit on a shelf of this tree. And I had a general idea of what I wanted to do, but I wasn't exactly sure how it was gonna, work out in the 3D. So I did some Google searches online and came up with some neat trees that I thought would work for inspiration, and I'll bring those up here. But it still wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So I thought this would be a good chance. Some people ask me, if I draw out my stuff first, and most of the time I don't. But I thought in this case, it'd be a good idea to draw it out. Plus I could, practice using my digital pen. I'll draw it out digitally, and then I could use that as a reference. And it doesn't have to be an exact duplicate of my digital art, but I wanted to, basically come up with some concept art for it first, since I knew the digital art would take a lot less time to do than the 3D sculpture. And I didn't want to go in totally clueless of what I was going to do. So anyways, I'm going to share with you my digital art process first, and then we'll get on to the sculpture, which I'm going to do out of Worbla. So I'm starting my digital drawing. I use Sketchbook for my iPad, and then I just have one of those Apple pencils. And I'm just gonna do the first layer and just kind of a loose sketch to give me an idea of what I want for the tree. And I'm using my reference pictures that I showed earlier to give me a little bit of a direction with this. Now I'm not worried about this being perfect, but I did want to kind of get some practice using the digital pen and this program, so I thought this would be good to do as much as I could with it. But I'm not worried about ever printing these out or anything, so if a few of the edges aren't quite perfect, that's quite okay. So I'm just getting it all filled in now with the black layer. There's a separate layer, and then I can lower the transparency of the initial sketch layer. So I'm just going over all the branches with the black, getting everything in there how I want. And then I went ahead and drew the heart on there. And I'm just touching up a few of the branches, the leaves, make sure everything looks how I want it to look. So here's a finished look at the digital drawing for the tree. And then I went ahead and transferred that to my iPad mini. You can see to the side there, moved up to the right corner to use that as a reference while I sculpt. So now I'm just taking some foil and sculpting out the tree with it. So I'm doing it in two separate sections right now. I'm doing the main trunk with a branch and then a separate branch on the right. So now I'm just going to heat up some Worbla, wrap it around, and cover my two sections of foil. So this first one, I'm having it wrap around and meet in the back. That way, if I have any kind of seam line there, it's hidden. And even though I'm going to go ahead and make the back finished, I'm not worried about it ever being visible, except for when you pick it up, and then it is what it is. Now there will be some, seam lines from some of the clay, or not the clay. I work with clay too much. There'll be some seam lines with the Worbla where they meet in sections, and so I just heat it up and use the ball tool to smooth that in. So once I'm happy with the first piece, I'm going to go ahead and cover the second smaller branch with Worbla. And then you're going to get that completely covered, smooth it in with the ball tool, and just use my scraps of clay to cover these little pieces. Get that all finished up, and then I'm going to hold it in place, heat it up, and merge those two pieces together and just adjust it a little bit until I'm happy with it. Now what I'm doing is cutting some extra pieces and adding another layer of Worbla onto the sides and the front of the trunk, because I know I'm going to do some carving in there, and I want to make sure I have a little bit thicker area to work with, so I can, when I carve in like the heart and stuff, that have more depth to work with. So I'm just getting this finished up, adding some texture with my ball tool. I decided to go ahead. I'm going to build up the base a little bit, made it a little bit wider than my drawing. But at this point, I kind of decided that this might actually work to stand on its own, if that's what my wife prefers. When I was making it, I wasn't for sure if she would want to hang it or set it on a shelf. So this kind of gives her a couple different options. So now I'm just using the back of my X-Acto knife to carve in some texture. And I started off with a needle tool, but I've broken needle tools before doing that, so I decided to switch to my X-Acto knife and use the back of the blade to do these deep crevices in the tree bark. So now I'm just going through, touching up a few spots. Now I'm going to use my ball tool and make the heart with our initials in it, and then with the arrow going through. So I'm just going to draw that in with the ball tool while that Worbla is hot. And then I'll go ahead and add some more details. Now I'm going to start cutting some strips of Worbla to add some little branches. I want to have a couple going off to the side, have basically one on each side, and then fill in a bunch of branches in the middle along with the letters. So I'm just going to do a few of these right now, and then I take a short break just to kind of give myself a rest, and then go back to the project and start working on some more branches. So I decided when I do the middle, I think it would work out best to do the letters first, and then I can resize those other branches however I want. But I didn't want to make the other branches too big and not have room for the letters. So I did the L and O on the left branch and the V and E on the right branch. And then in my initial drawing, I had this little branch come off of the E, but then to me that looked weird and it looked almost like a T or something. So I took that off, and I figured I could use that somewhere else. So then I heated that up and then added some other started working on some other little branches that I could add to it. And so I'm just using my reference photo to give me a general idea of how I want these branches to look. And then I'll go ahead and take another short break, then get back to the sculpture. So my V and E weren't very sturdy on there, so I took those off and then heated them up and reattached them to give it a little more strength. And then I went back to finishing up these little branches, just getting them all shaped out. I want to have a lot of smaller limbs going off of them, give it a nice, not too full of a look in the middle, but I don't want it to be too barren either. I want a good balance. And so I just went through, did some more branches. It's a lot of branches. Sorry for all the branch talk. So you'll notice there I was using some foil to support it, because when you heat up the Worbla, it droops. And so here, I was trying to avoid that, so I just heated up the end, so I wouldn't get the whole piece soft, because then it just droops down and you need something to support it till it cools again. So I'm going to make a few more little branches. I had a certain number in mind here, and so I wanted to make sure I could do all those. And then I got all those attached. And then I wanted to start cutting out some little leaves. And so, again, I had a certain number I wanted to do on these leaves, so I went ahead and cut those out. I wanted them to be about the same style, but not the same size. I wanted, so I didn't make a pattern for them. I just went ahead and cut them out. And then once I had all of them cut out, I used my needle tool to hold them down while I heated them, and that also kind of gave me a little bit of a crease, and then I could attach them to the branches. And they were still warm enough I didn't have to reheat them, and it worked out really well because it gave that, a little bit of a shape to it instead of just a flat leaf. So I went through and attached all of them. And I just keep basically holding them, heating them, and attaching them until I get them all placed. And it's a very repetitive process, but a necessary one to get everything in place. And I heated up to my desk area too much, so my limbs started drooping a lot. So I went ahead and put the foil in place and then adjusted them. So I was happy with how they were laying, and then let them cool down with that foil behind them. So while they're cooling, I'm going to go ahead and take another break, and then I'll get back and finish it up. So at this point, I had sent some pictures to an artist group that I'm in and asked them what they thought. And the consensus was that I needed to do a little deeper carving of the heart and some of the texture on the tree. And I'm glad I sent it to them because, I was on the fence on, it needed something, but I wasn't for sure what. So I was really happy I did that and the feedback I got. So I'm going to go ahead and let that set for a bit. Now I'm going to do my surface prep. So I just used gesso, and that way it'll help the paint bond to the sculpture better. So I'm going to go ahead and cover the entire front. I let that dry. Overnight, and I went ahead and covered the back too. I just didn't bother filming that because it's a very, it's the same process. There's nothing different there. So now I'm going to go ahead and paint the back of it with some brown patio paint, and I'll let that dry for a few hours. Doesn't really have to dry overnight. Flip that over and start painting the front. And I believe this one was a woodland brown. I just wanted a really dark brown for a base coat. So then I could dry brush some lighter colors on top of that. And I think that would get the look that I'm going for with all that texture detail that I put into the tree, especially in the trunk area. So I'm just going over everything, trying to get every little crevice. I want to make sure there's none of that Worbla showing through. Now that I'm done with that coat, I'm going to let that dry for a few hours. Now with that coat dry, I can go ahead and go back over the sculpture with some more woodland brown. And I can see the areas that need a little more paint or any little gaps that I may have missed. I just want to make sure it has a nice thick coat of that dark brown. So it'll look really good when I dry brush over it. So I'm going to go ahead and let it dry again. Then I'm going to go over one more time with the woodland brown. There's just some areas I wasn't happy with. Just didn't look thick enough on there. So I'm going to touch it up, and then I'll go ahead and let it dry again for a couple more hours. There's a lot of stop and go with this piece. So now I switch to this pinecone brown. It's a much lighter brown. And I'm just dry brushing this on. So you can see here with the trunk detail, when you dry brush that on, it really makes everything stand out, and you can see the heart and the bark texture. And you just basically what you're doing is you're loading the paint onto your brush and then brushing off the excess, and then you're just going over the surface of it, the high points. You're just brushing it over the high points of your sculpture, so that way the crevices are still that dark brown. And this technique works really well. I really like it for a lot of different pieces, and so especially for tree type things. I've done several Groots out of Worbla, and then doing this, and I'm really happy how this look works on those things. So I'm going to go ahead and let that coat dry. And then I'm going to go in and dry brush again, because that first coat is over that such a dark brown. It came across as being a little bit too dark for the tree still. So I thought I would go over it again, make sure that I had the shade of brown that I wanted for this. So now that I'm happy with that, I'll go ahead and let that dry for a few hours. And then I can go in and start painting my leaves. So I started off with this darker green, and basically what I did is I just painted each leaf on the front and then flipped it over and then painted them on the back, and then I was able to flip it over again and go back to the front, because by the time I got around to the leaves, back around, they were dry. It was a pretty time-consuming process, and it's one of those things where it's like the smallest thing on the tree, but it took the most time because I had to use a little brush, and I tried to avoid, getting it anywhere on the branches that I didn't want to get it on. I just wanted to keep it on the leaves. So once I was done with this, I'm going to go ahead and let this dry for a couple hours. And again, I shared this with my artist group, and I wasn't really happy. I asked if, they thought it should have a lighter color, and they agreed or confirmed what I thought, that it needed a lighter color. I was kind of hoping like, oh, they're going to say, no, it looks fine, and that way, less work. But I really wanted this project to turn out the best it could, so I went with their advice and did a lighter shade of green on this. And you can already see here, it's really making those leaves pop. But I did the same technique where I painted all the front of the leaves, and then I flipped it over and then painted the backs of the leaves, and just went through each leaf. And then once I was done with that, flipped it over, and I just kept doing that until I was happy with the coverage of it. I wasn't really trying to dry brush these, but I didn't want to have too much paint on my brush either, because I didn't want it to be goopy. I wanted to just be a nice, smooth paint job on these. So they have a nice finished look. I wanted to have do the best I could with them. So I think these are looking pretty good. So now I'm going to go ahead and let it sit for a bit, let it dry overnight, and we'll take a look at the finished piece. And here is the finished anniversary tree I made for my wife out of Worbla for our anniversary last week. So I'll bring it in. We can take a closer look at some of the details. So you can see the different shades of brown in there for the bark detail. Take a good look at the heart I carved in there with the arrow with our initials. I'm really happy how that turned out. It doesn't, stand out too bold, but I think that really works. It makes it look like those initials were carved into the tree years ago, and the trees continue to grow, but you can still see it. It's still there. Look at some of the branches and the leaves. I wanted to take a close-up look at the love here. So when I was doing the digital drawing, I knew I wanted the love to be separate branches. But I thought doing 4 branches, doing one for each letter would be a little too much. So I decided to go with 2 letters on each branch, and then they kind of come together in the middle. And I thought that was some good symbolism, and it to me, it has a nice flow to it. And then I just added the other branches to kind of fill it in, and added some leaves and did some lighter green to add a little more contrast to the piece. So I'll bring it back here. Let you get one more look at the whole piece. But it was a lot of fun doing this piece. I always, whenever I make something for somebody, especially for a special occasion, I always feel like that little kid in art class, making a little statue or figurine or something for my mom or dad. And it's like, I couldn't afford to get you something, but I made you this. Here you go. But as we get older, I think we definitely appreciate things that more that are handmade, and it's, to me, this, I put a lot of time, effort, and love into this piece, and she definitely appreciated that. So I'm glad I did it. I just can't help but having those little flashbacks back to grade school, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just like, should I just buy her something? But in the end, I was very happy I did this. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a like down below. And also be sure to let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Hope everybody's staying safe and healthy. And remember, never stop creating. Bye.